The first time she said it, the rain was coming down so hard against the tin roof of the animal shelter that it nearly drowned out her voice. The sound of barking dogs echoed through the concrete hallways, sharp and restless, but her words still cut through everything like glass. She was kneeling on the cold floor beside a trembling golden retriever with cloudy eyes and matted fur, her fingers buried gently in his coat as if holding him together was the only thing keeping her from falling apart herself. Her voice was barely more than a breath, fragile enough to disappear into the storm. "I'm too broken to be loved." And standing just a few feet away, holding the hand of his 7-year-old daughter, the single father heard every word. If you believe every story hides a lesson waiting to be discovered, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Stories. Sometimes the quietest moments carry the loudest truths. The shelter sat on the edge of town where the pavement cracked into gravel and wild grass pushed stubbornly through the earth. It wasn't the kind of place people noticed unless they were looking for something they'd lost. The building itself was old, weather-worn, and smelled of antiseptic, wet fur, and the faint ache of abandonment. For years, people came and went through its dented metal doors searching for companionship, redemption, or simply a distraction from loneliness. Some left carrying leashes and wagging tails. Others left with their emptiness still intact. She had worked there for almost 3 years. Her name was Emma, though most people at the shelter knew her simply as the quiet volunteer with tired eyes and the faded coral shirt she seemed to wear every Saturday. She moved through the kennels with a kind of practiced tenderness, speaking softly to the frightened animals no one else wanted to touch. She knew which dogs startled at sudden noises, which cats hated being held, and which broken creatures needed nothing more than someone willing to sit beside them in silence. The animals trusted her because she understood them. Broken things always recognize each other. There was a time when Emma had laughed easily. There had been a time when her hair was brushed carefully each morning and her smile came without effort. But life had a cruel way of rearranging people. 5 years earlier, she had stood in the sterile white hallway of a hospital gripping the edge of a plastic chair while a doctor explained that her husband hadn't survived the crash. The words had landed all at once and yet somehow never fully arrived. She remembered staring at the doctor's moving lips, hearing nothing except the deafening hum of fluorescent lights overhead. 2 months later, she lost the baby she hadn't yet told him about. Some grief shatters loudly, others fracture you in complete silence. Emma's grief had been the silent kind. It hollowed her from the inside until she became a version of herself she barely recognized. Friends stopped calling when she never answered. Invitations disappeared. The world moved on, as it always does, while she remained trapped in the wreckage of memories she couldn't escape. The animal shelter became the only place where her pain made sense. There, among abandoned creatures with scars hidden beneath fur, she didn't have to explain herself. Then one Saturday in late October, he walked in. Daniel Mercer looked like a man permanently running 5 minutes behind life. His dark hair was usually uncombed, his flannel shirts wrinkled, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion that no amount of sleep could fix. He was 36 and had spent the last 4 years raising his daughter alone after losing his wife to cancer. Grief had shaped him too, though differently. Where Emma had withdrawn into silence, Daniel had been forced into motion. There had been school lunches to pack, fevers to soothe, nightmares to chase away. There was no luxury in collapse when someone small depended on you to keep standing. That Saturday, he'd come because his daughter Lily had spent weeks begging for a dog. At 7 years old, Lily had inherited her mother's wide brown eyes and impossible optimism. She believed every sad thing could be fixed with enough love. Emma noticed them immediately. The little girl moved from kennel to kennel with awe written across her face, while Daniel followed behind with the expression of a man mentally calculating vet bills and chewed furniture. And then Lily stopped in front of an elderly golden retriever named Walter. Walter had been surrendered after 12 years because his owners were moving overseas. Since then, he'd spent 6 months at the shelter growing quieter each day. Most people passed his kennel without a second glance. Lily knelt immediately. Walter pressed his graying muzzle to the bars. Emma had watched the exchange from across the room, her chest tightening. Some connections are visible before they're understood. When she opened Walter's kennel and guided him out, Lily wrapped her small arms around his neck without hesitation. Daniel smiled for the first time that morning. It was while filling out adoption paperwork that he overheard Emma whisper those words. "I'm too broken to be loved." He hadn't meant to hear it. She'd been speaking to Walter after noticing his anxiety during the thunderstorm. Her forehead rested gently against his as if sharing a secret. But Daniel heard, and something inside him recognized the truth behind her voice. The following Saturday, he came back. Walter trotted happily beside Lily on a bright blue leash. Daniel told himself they were there to let Walter visit. He told himself Lily wanted to show Emma how well Walter was settling in. But when he spotted Emma kneeling beside a nervous pit bull mix, sunlight catching the loose strands of hair escaping her ponytail, he understood it was something else. She looked surprised to see them. Lily ran to her first, launching into an enthusiastic explanation about Walter stealing pancakes that morning. Emma laughed. It was a small sound, rusty from disuse, but real. Daniel noticed, and he kept coming back. Every Saturday. At first, there was always a reason. Walter needed his nails trimmed. Lily wanted to donate old blankets. They were, just in the neighborhood. But eventually, excuses became unnecessary. Saturday mornings became sacred. Emma would be there with her coral shirt and guarded smile. Daniel would arrive carrying coffee for himself and hot chocolate for Lily. Sometimes he brought an extra cup and left it casually on the counter beside Emma. She always accepted it with a quiet thank you. Weeks turned into months. Winter came, wrapping the shelter in sharp winds and silver frost. Slowly, carefully, something shifted. Emma began talking more, at first about the animals. Then about books she loved. Then about memories she'd spent years burying. Daniel never pushed. He simply listened. There is a particular kind of healing that happens when someone stays long enough to hear the parts of your story you thought made you unlovable. One snowy afternoon after closing, they sat together on a bench outside the shelter while Lily played fetch with Walter. Emma finally told him everything. The accident, the baby, the years of emptiness, the crushing belief that anyone who came close to her would eventually be swallowed by her grief. Daniel listened without interruption, his breath visible in the cold air. When she finished, tears streaked silently down her face. And then she said it again. I'm too broken to be loved. This time, Daniel didn't stay silent. He looked out at his daughter laughing in the snow, at Walter bounding awkwardly after the tennis ball, at the fading pink light stretching across the sky. Then he told her that broken things weren't less worthy of love. Sometimes they were the very things that taught people how to love more honestly. Emma cried harder then, not because his words fixed anything, but because for the first time, someone had stayed after hearing the worst parts of her story. Please pause here and comment if this story is touching your heart. Sometimes sharing what you feel helps someone else feel less alone. Spring arrived quietly. The grass around the shelter turned green again. And one Saturday, as Emma locked the shelter doors, she found Daniel waiting beside his truck. Lily was asleep in the backseat with Walter curled protectively at her feet. Daniel handed Emma a small paper bag. Inside was a dog leash, brand new, and a note that simply read, "There's room for one more, if you're ready." Emma looked up, confused. Daniel smiled and gestured toward the passenger seat where a tiny rescue puppy slept inside a blanket. Her breath caught. The puppy had been abandoned that morning. Blind in one eye, unwanted by everyone who'd seen her. Emma laughed through tears. Then she looked at Daniel. Really looked at him, at the patience in his eyes. The steadiness, the quiet way he had shown up every single Saturday without demanding anything in return. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future not defined by loss. She climbed into the truck. Not because she was suddenly healed. Not because pain had disappeared. But because love had never required perfection. Only presence, only patience, only someone willing to keep showing up. And as they drove into the fading golden light, with Lily asleep and Walter snoring softly and the tiny puppy curled in Emma's lap, she realized brokenness had never made her unlovable. It had simply made her human. If this story made you feel something deep inside, like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Stories. And tell us below, have you ever met someone who changed your life simply by showing up? Because sometimes love doesn't arrive with fireworks or grand promises. Sometimes it arrives quietly, every Saturday, and waits for your heart to believe it deserves to open again.